This one right here. Hold up. Something is not working. Hello, hello, hello. See this?
Doing, but it wasn't about finishing fast. Doing, but it wasn't about
So how come this works?
finishing fast.
Okay. Okay. So this is weird. For some reason, let's see now. Let's see now. This makes no sense. So this works. All right, hold up. Let me try something out real quick because for some reason This makes no sense. So we can move it here. Move it here. Let's see. So we move it here. Move it here. Let's see.
Would be working his 5th day at his new job. He was tasked with retrieving a sample of molten iron for testing. He spun down a giant metal wheel that caused the molten iron to pour out of the vat. Afterwards, he leaned over the boiling hot iron. He got close, like really close. And then liquid molten iron popped and exploded all over his face. I'm kidding. He successfully retrieved his sample of iron and returned back to his manager. Unluckily, however, he'd somehow slip on the stage and partially fall back into the molten vat of
Yo, his body's getting burned off. I'm calling it already. His body's getting burned off. Watch.
iron. He tried to escape, but it was impossible. Half of his body was in, half of it was out. And before you know it, in an instant, he was consumed by the roaring orange abyss. Witnesses described what happened as beyond comprehension. He passed away instantly, but not all of him was consumed.
See, that's like one of my worst, like biggest fears. Like just having your face being burned off.
No, in an instant. What happened as beyond comprehension. He passed away instantly, but not all of him was consumed.
See, that's like one of my worst, like biggest fears. Like just having your face being like, I can't with that. It's just you know?
Part of his body remained on the steel deck for the coroner to retrieve. Emergency crews rushed in, but it was already way too late. There was no saving him. The foundry quickly shut down, investigations were launched, and then questions arose. How could a man with so little training be placed so close to one of the most dangerous areas of the factory? It was literally his 5th day on the job. For his colleagues, it was not the first time they'd seen such horror. Just a year earlier, another worker had passed away at the same plant after a similar fall. And now, yet again, a worker's life had been cut short in the most violent way imaginable. In factories like these, Safety isn't just a guideline, it's survival. When molten metal waits beneath your feet, there's no second chance. One misstep and you're gone in an instant. The cable incident. It was just after noon at the Whitworth sawmill in East Texas. The air was thick with the grind of machines, the smell of fresh-cut pine, and the heat of men working hard to keep the mill alive. But inside, 4 men were locked in a struggle with a jammed wood chip machine. To free it, they turned to the heavy steel cable that wound its way around the gears. They pulled, adjusted, and worked the line, hoping to break the machine loose. And then, in an instant, disaster struck.
It's gonna snap.
After working the
It's gonna snap. I'm calling it. It's gonna snap.
cable for what felt like forever, they had stretched it out to the point that it extended itself like a bow and tightened back on one of the men. Upon pulling the cable and stretching it back out again to free the man, it finally snapped. The stored energy released with the speed of a bullet and the force of a guillotine. It whipped across the work area with deadly precision, striking all 5 men at once. The impact was catastrophic. 4 of the 5 were decapitated instantly. The 5th man got lucky. He was thrown away to the side and the bones in his leg got shattered, but thankfully his life was spared. For the men who witnessed it, the scene was indescribable. One moment, their co-workers were fighting with some stupid jammed machine. The next second, the floor was silent and each of their bodies stood upright in their same positions with a crucial detail missing. The ground was littered with helmets, sawdust, and bodies. When EMTs arrived at the scene, they were obviously only able to save the man with the injured leg. The sleeve incident. In a cavernous factory in Russia, cameras were quietly watching a scene that
The sleeve incident?
would later horrify the world.
Okay.
On the floor stood a massive horizontal lathe. The machine was giant, and its steel cylinder was rotating with an unstoppable force. It was a machine built to carve
Watch someone get caught in that.
through metal itself.
Okay, someone's gonna get caught in it.
A Russian man tasked with running the machinery froze upon seeing it. For a couple of moments, he would just squint deeply at the machine, closely inspecting it. His posture was casual, and then from casual, it grew curious. Although it's not entirely clear what it was, the man noticed something wrong with the machine, but after inspecting it, he went about his business. And then he came back because his curiosity got the best of him. Something was obviously wrong with the machine, so he went in for another look. It was then that he realized that he had been inspecting the wrong thing all along. His gaze shifted from the machine to the ceiling above it, and he was astonished with what he saw. He was right. There was a bit of a leak dripping down from the ceiling onto the machine. A sigh of relief came from the man as he became relieved that he had figured out the issue. As he began leaving to retrieve items to fix the leak, he'd quickly realize another, more concerning issue. His sleeve was stuck. And just like that, in a heartbeat, everything changed. The man was yanked into the spinning machine. His body slammed between the cylinder and the base, whipping around with such force that he looked like a rag doll in the grip of a hurricane. The lathe spun faster and faster. First his shoes would fly off, then pieces of his flesh, then chunks, then his limbs. And before you knew it, he was turned into a mist. The camera captured it all. There was no time for rescue or hope of survival. Moments later, another worker in full protective gear entered from the side. He froze at the sight he saw. Red trails, shredded remains, and a stained room. He lifted his hands in complete frustration, then dropped them in despair. The unfiltered camera footage spread across the internet, shocking millions before being digitally wiped away. Safety experts pointed out the obvious in this case. Don't wear loose clothing around machines like these, and always keep a safe distance between them. The donut incident.
Donut?
It was just another midday drive for this 28-year-old man in
Yeah, be honest. How many? How many can you stack on it? Dead ass. Legit.
Ohio. The sky was clear, the roads were stretched out like any other time, and for him, his morning had officially started. The only thing left for him to do was to get some breakfast.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done in a list view. Next, I set a priority and a due date to
So he'd stop by a store to grab some donuts and coffee before taking off for work. And just like that, his morning was entirely complete. The man was sipping a coffee in one hand and biting a donut in the other. For him, things really couldn't get any better than this, but somewhere between the first sip and the next bite, everything went sideways. Literally.
You know what would make this day better? Some music. Hey Siri, play some Diddy.
Now playing Demi Lovato.
What? No. I said play Diddy, like, you know, Puff Daddy?
Now playing Yeet.
I'll just do it myself.
While eating his donut, it'd slip out of his hands and knock over his coffee. In a panic to stop the spilling, he quickly reached for the beverage to steady it, and just like that. In a split second, his car veered left to the opposite lane of traffic. I forgot to mention that this was all occurring in the middle of the highway, on an extremely busy Wednesday morning. And unfortunately, at 50 to 60 miles per hour, that's all it takes. His vehicle cut across the lane and slammed head-on into two westbound cars, completely flattening one in the process. The impact was violent enough to leave 3 vehicles completely mangled and scatter their debris across the field of the road like an explosion. Witnesses said it was chaos. One driver was trapped inside their vehicle with crushed metal pinning them in place, while first responders worked frantically to cut them free. As for the flattened car, it sat in the ditch with its airbags blown out, windshield shattered, and frame completely crushed. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they worked desperately to extract the victims from the wreckage. They would even try to bring out the body in the flattened vehicle, and to their sheer horror, the victim was still alive. The crews would immediately transfer both individuals to the University Hospital's Georgia Medical Center, while a third refused further treatment. To everyone's total shock, all the victims in this accident survived with no life-threatening injuries. The man responsible was quickly identified and questioned. His rambunctious craving for donuts and coffee on the highway had turned a quiet Ohio road into a disaster scene. Police instantly cited him on the spot. Sometimes it's not speed or weather or a drunk driver that causes the crash. Sometimes it can simply just be a donut, so don't drive while distracted. 35. Honestly, this one was a little too depressing, so I decided to take it out. Instead, for this incident, you can just look at this cute rabbit for a bit. Hell Train. It was the evening rush on February 3rd, 2015 in Valhalla, New York.
Wow.
Commuters boarded the Metro North train that was headed for the suburbs after a long day in Manhattan. At the same time, a 49-year-old mother from Edgemont was behind the wheel of her Mercedes SUV. She had just left work and was cutting through unfamiliar backroads due to an earlier accident on the highway. She approached the Commerce Street crossing, a dangerous grade-level track where warning lights flashed and gates descended. But instead of stopping, as you might have already, you'd think that she would reverse her car out of harm's way, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Instead, she drove forward, accidentally stopping on the rails as the crossing gate came down behind her, pinning her vehicle into one place. She panicked quickly.
She's such an idiot. Idiot. You're gonna get freaking hit by a train.
Trying to find an escape, but without a second to react, headlights pierced the dark.
Oh, what did I say? What did I say?
The Metro North train, carrying hundreds of passengers, slammed into her SUV with catastrophic force. The impact drove the 5,000-pound vehicle nearly 1,000 feet up the tracks before ripping it apart. But that's only the beginning of what made this situation so terrible. When the train impacted her car, the rails snapped off the ground and speared through her SUV, right into the train's passengers. These rails would shoot up from the floor and send fire and sparks exploding onto the passengers. The first carriage completely erupted into flames as metal debris tore through windows and seats like shrapnel. At the rear of the train, riders only felt a slight bump, but up at the front, it was a pure nightmare. Smoke filled the cars, people screamed, and sections of rail shot through the cabin like burning javelins. People desperately clawed at jammed doors, but the heat was unbearable and too suffocating. The smell of burning seats, fuel, and flesh is all that survivors could remember when trying to escape. The scene was described as literal hell on a train. When the fire finally died down, 6 people were gone and 15 others were severely injured. The SUV was obliterated, and the train was left mangled and scarred by the flames.
Out of my room.
This remains the deadliest crash in Metro North Railroad's history, and the moral is as simple as it is brutal. When you're on the road, always be attentive and learn to react quickly. Most of the time,
wanted to see what we were not even hanging out with her.
Really, Aiden just went over to do COD, so.
Yeah? I'm not just talking about you. I'm talking about both of you. Vamos.
Roads are actually pretty boring, and honestly, they don't really have crazy things like this happening all the time, but in the rare case you end up in a situation like this, be prepared and always act fast. Teeth.
Teeth. Someone's getting bit, bro. I swear someone's gonna get bit.
You get booked into prison and the air feels heavier the second that steel door slams shut behind you. The cuffs come off, but all eyes are still on you. You look left to right, only to see inmates sizing you up like wolves around a wounded deer. The first week you're in there, you're purely fresh meat. From getting shoved in chow lines to getting tripped in the showers, you quickly find out that in prison showing weakness is an invitation to getting beat up. So you stop.
That's Diddy.
You start doing push-ups until your chest is on fire and burpees until your vision blurs. Anything heavy that you can get your hands on, you quickly start lifting. As usual, the fights keep on coming. But for once, you finally win. A few months later, people know your name. Inmates begin nodding at you in the yard. Gangs start sending some of their guys to your cell not to beat you up, but to rather invite you to their group. As usual, you stay solo, but the respect, that's yours now. You've earned it, and everybody recognizes it. It wasn't easy, but you've finally climbed the ranks of approval inside of the prison. One night, you come back to your cell and you can't help but to feel that something's off. You look inside, only to find a scrawny newcomer sprawled out on the top of the bed. Your bed. You've been locked up long enough to know that what this man is doing is one of the biggest signs of disrespect in the prison, but the man seems ignorant to the culture. He's half asleep with his head on your pillow, like he owns the place.
Hey, wake up. Huh? Can't you see that I'm trying to catch some sleep? Get the off my bed. Man, it's too early for this. Just buzz off.
Everyone's watching. This is the biggest disrespect you've received in months, and you become enraged to a point where you finally decide enough's enough. You grab the scrawny man and rip him off your bunk bed, slamming him down to the floor in an instant. Without wasting a second, you begin swinging at him like it's no man's business. Inmates rush out from their cells and form a crowd between the two of you, excited to see the fight take place. Your fists connect over and over, and cheers erupt around you from all types of prisoners. You lock him in a tight headlock, with your muscles bulging. He's flailing aimlessly, with snot and tears dripping from his eyes and nose. Gang leaders begin placing bets on who'll win the fight for fun, but it's obvious. You're winning easily. And then, it happens. A pain so sharp and blinding that it...
He beat his testes. He bit his testes. Jesus Christ.
doesn't feel real. You really don't want to look, but you look anyways in pure disbelief. It wasn't just a gut feeling, your brain was right. The dude is literally biting your nose. You scream like a banshee. It's a sound you can't even recognize coming from yourself. But right now, you don't care. You begin to claw, punch, and bash on him. Unfortunately, however, you only find that the more you hit him, the harder the bite becomes. When you start to feel tissue rip, your punches turn into desperate pleas for him to stop. He doesn't listen. The crowd isn't cheering anymore, and even the veterans look sick. You begin begging for the guards to intervene, but by the time they rush in and rip him off you, it's too late. You're found convulsing on the floor, unresponsive, with life-threatening injuries. Medical staff does their absolute best to save you, but you're broken in a way that can't be undone. This incident took place in Ghana during 2021. Both individuals got into an altercation that led to this shamelessly terrifying fight. The suspect that committed the crime was taken to court again, where he'd received judgment for his attack. Always remember to protect your jewels. The freezer incident. On January 12th, a 33-year-old man would be taken to the Walker County Jail, confused, malnourished, and sick. His cousin had called for help, hoping that the police would bring an ambulance and give him medical assistance. However, the sheriff's deputies arrived to the scene first, and they reported that the man brandished a weapon and let off a round towards the officers before running into a forest. When they finally apprehended him, he was seen to be malnourished and in a state of total delirium, with his only comments being incoherent babbles about portals in hell. Instead of taking the man to the hospital, the officers would lock him in a cold booking cell and remove his clothes for whatever reason. From the moment the door clanged shut, the cold began eating at him. It seeped into his bones, turned his skin to goose flesh, and made his teeth chatter until his jaw ached. Each breath fogged in the air like it was Christmas night, and the man began shivering so violently that it hurt. An officer would state that this treatment was fitting, since the man fired a weapon at the officers. Some other jailers even said that the cops should have just fired at him, instead of bringing him back to the jail alive. Days passed without food, warmth, or medical treatment for his mental state, until one day he was finally taken out of the cell. However, it would be for anything but a good reason. Despite being in a freezing cold cell with temperatures that dropped below 30 degrees for nearly a week, officers still thought that these conditions were too comfortable for him. To the man's complete horror, they wanted to lock him in the jail's kitchen freezer. They would rip him out of his cell and tase him so violently that he'd lose his dentures in the process. With his wrists and ankles shackled, they would throw the man in a metal restraint chair, tie him down, and leave him in the freezer. The air inside was biting. Any ounce of heat his body may have maintained before was sapped instantly. His body burned with fever, then chilled again, as if it couldn't decide whether to fight or surrender. The hum of the refrigeration unit filled the silence. His fingers stiffened, his lips turned blue, and the man froze with every second in that chair, feeling like hours. When they moved him back to the holding cell, the floor was littered with trash. He lay there motionless, ribs showing, breath shallow. A nurse appeared briefly, stood at the doorway, then turned off the light and left him in darkness.
Brian is the best content marketing team lead I've ever worked with, but before he created his content calendar using Monday.com, his strategy was,
Guards passed his cell, some stopping to look, others just walking by. Not one brought him clothes. After enduring 2 weeks of pure horror, the officers took him to a hospital. A human's normal body temp is supposed to be about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. But when they brought him in, he was only breathing 2 breaths per minute with a pulse that was nearly non-existent, and his body temperature shockingly read 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Doctors tried to warm him up and did their absolute best to push his body back from the edge, but, sadly enough, it was too late. In the official report, officers would lie and say that he was completely fine when he left the jail, and that hypothermia is what caused this outcome. But in truth, they froze him alive. Thankfully, 10 jail staff members would all be tried and charged in relation to this incident. Let situations like these encourage you to know the law and your rights as a civilian well. And also, let it serve as a reminder for people like you and I to refuse to look the other way whenever those in power treat humans with cruelty. The Face Incident. In the summer of 2021, on a remote highway in Turkey, a young man deeply in love with his motorcycle woke up to a nice sunny day and decided that it was the best time to take his bike out for a spin. A nice leather jacket with protective boots, gloves, and a helmet was what this man quickly threw on before going out for the ride. Just kidding, he decided that he didn't want to wear any of that since it's a hot summer day. But on the bright side, at least he decided to keep his helmet on, right? After making sure that he was wearing no protective gear at all, this rider would then take his sport bike for a nice calm ride of 120 miles per hour. After hitting the highways, the rider couldn't contain himself and began speeding as fast as possible on his bike. However, unbeknownst to him, a steep turn with a guardrail would appear on the highway out of nowhere. Unable to correct his path in time, he was flung from the bike and hurled face first into the corner of a steel guardrail. The impact was so violent that it completely removed the entire front of his head and face. His eyes, nose, jaw, and facial skin were instantly torn away, leaving only the back of his skull intact. Bystanders who arrived moments later could hardly process what they were seeing. It looked less like an accident and more like a war zone. They searched for his body, and upon a glimpse, were instantly traumatized since it didn't really look like a human anymore. Bystanders did what they could, but unfortunately, he never had a chance. Emergency responders pronounced him unresponsive at the scene. This next situation falls just past midnight on April 1st, 2025, in Phuket, Thailand. The streets were most
Okay.